From the secret of Blue's Lego Gym to the truth of Gen 2's legendary beasts, this is 19 more secrets in Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal. So surely I'm not the only one to wonder why Blue's gym is made of Lego. Well, apparently it's not because Blue is so evil that he makes you walk across it barefoot. And there's actually evidence to suggest that it's not Lego at all. Some people have speculated that these building blocks you see here are actually N and B blocks. And this is a reference to an old product Nintendo used to make. It turns out long ago that they actually tried to compete with Lego, and so it's likely that these are what's in Blue's gym. So possibly a cool reference. It unfortunately still doesn't explain why the gym is made of this. There's a running theory that all those blocks you see aren't in fact blocks at all, and instead are shelves storing Pokeballs. It's not super obvious, but I can definitely see what they're going for here. What's cool though is players have counted 224 Pokeballs around the gym, which is actually a really interesting number. Assuming every Pokeball has a unique Pokemon, that means 27 Pokemon are unaccounted for. And you can actually explain these 27 Pokemon really easily. So first you can assume that Blue wouldn't have the 11 legendaries of these two generations. That's 5 from Gen 1 and 6 from Generation 2. Next, it's also fair to assume that he wouldn't have got the 9 Pokemon of the Johto starters. This is because he hasn't met the Gen 2 character or professor yet, since his dialogue suggests he hasn't even been to Johto. So it's unlikely he would have acquired any of the starters. Next, we can assume he wouldn't have caught Unknown, since Gold solved the puzzle that made them appear for the first time, taking us up to 245 Pokemon. And as for the last 6, well, if you account for the ones in his party, that makes a nice clean 251. And while unlikely canon, it's a fun little explanation to show that Blue has caught basically every obtainable Pokemon in the game. And that's not the only Gen 2 gym with a secret. Did you know Whitney's gym is designed in the shape of a Clefairy? Okay, well, yeah, probably most of you knew that, but I'll do you one better. Did you know Jasmine, the 6 Steel-type leader's gym, originally had a second floor? In a recent data leak, a corresponding event script can be found revealing Jasmine on a second floor. There was also a junior trainer there that had a camper overworld sprite. And the image you're seeing on screen right now is a recreation of what this gym would have looked like. Jasmine's gym has always felt so bare bones, and I think it really would have been filled out nice with some junior trainers and a second floor. And that's not the only unused location of Generation 2, as one of the most interesting is the unused Safari Zone. Completely separate from the bug-catching contest of Johto's National Park, the Gen 2 games did make an effort to also include a Safari Zone in the post-game section of Kanto. It was never finished, let alone implemented, but it still does exist in the game files. Like you can see in Fuchsia City, the Safari Zone building exists, but the door has been removed. Fortunately, by simply entering a GameShark code, it's possible to make it so that any door you travel to takes you into the building. Once in, you can see it's basically just a regular guardhouse with no guards, and then by deactivating the code, you can head through the north door to enter the incompleted Safari Zone. And while very interesting to see an enhanced graphical version of the Gen 1 zone, it's incompleted and there are no Pokemon to be found here. Using a walk-through walls code will get you outside of the barriers to see a little more, but there still isn't much you can do here, apart from crash your game on reset barriers. And it's not just locations that went unused in Generation 2. The brick piece is an obtainable item held by Wild Machop traded from Generation 1. It sells for $25, only exists in Gen 2, and outside of its trade value has no purpose. Now there is a dude in Vermilion City who is trying to build a house with a Machop. Some people have speculated that there might have been plans for some sort of side quest related to this item. Outside of this though, there doesn't seem to be any other evidence for the brick piece having a purpose. It's also worth noting that there was a silver and gold leaf that could have been traded from multiple Gen 1 Pokemon, but they also have no purpose outside of trade value. There are, however, some useful Gen 1 trades you can make. Clefable gives leftovers, and the 3 legendary birds will actually give you bright powder. Now, another way to get rare items in Generation 2 was through Mystery Gift. To do this, you had to hold your Game Boy Color scanner up to another friend's. You could do this once a day, and it allowed you to acquire rare items such as the scope lens and even decorations for your bedroom. There are actually some really interesting dolls you could get, such as Snorlax and Lapras. These, however, were basically just reused overworld sprite assets, but more interesting, you could get a large Onix doll. And I find this so neat since Onix is not featured in the overworld of Gen 2, so they either either cut it or made it especially for the trainer's room. Now, if players were not able to acquire their own friend to mystery gift, there was actually another way to do this. So you could actually use the Nintendo 64 transfer pack to mystery gift with players in Pokemon Stadium 2. And you can actually mystery gift with Carrie, who is the girl in the Goldenrod department store who would normally give you mystery gift. But there's even more to this player than you might have thought. In Viridian City, there's a trainer house that lets you battle the last person you mystery gifted with. This could be a friend's team from real life, but since most of us play on emulators now, it's often you just get Cal, the trainer with all 3 Gen 2 starters. But if you actually happen to mystery gift with this girl, her identity is revealed to be trainer Carrie. She uses 3 different teams at random, and they're all really good. They all feature one of the Gen 2 starters, plus a hard to obtain Pokemon like Porygon 2, Politoed, and Caesar. Now, speaking of Caesar, let's talk about the metal coat. As a kid, I always hated that you had to decide who you wanted to use the metal coat on. And I wish I had known this as a kid, but it turns out you can actually get a second metal coat in Kanto by trading your Dugtrio for a Magneton in the Kanto power plant. This Magneton is guaranteed to come with a held metal coat. And it's really nice that they were actually considerate enough to give you 2 for both metal coat evolutions. The other thing I hated about the metal coat though is that you had to wait until the post game to get one. But it turns out that's just straight up not true, because you can get the metal coat right after the 3rd gym on Route 38 simply by catching Wild Magnemite. There is a 2% chance for Wild Magnemite to be carrying one, and while that is low, the love for Caesar kind of makes it worth it. Considering what a good and unique Pokemon it is, I think it's not that much work. But if you're feeling really impatient, you can also opt to wait until beating the Team Rocket hideout. The hideout contains the TM Thief, which you can then use on Magnemite to speed up the process quite a bit. And it's worth noting too that the same applies for the Dragon Scale with Wild Horsies, Seadras, Dratinis, and Dragonairs. And actually, while we're on the note of dragon items, there's actually a pretty fun bug in Generation 2. So you know the Dragon Fang, the item that Claire makes you retrieve in the Dragon's Den? Well, it's meant to increase the power of Dragon-type moves. But for some reason, the Dragon Scale actually does this along with evolving Seadra into Kingdra. And in a sad twist of fates, the Dragon Fang has no use outside of getting the 8th gym badge. Now, one interesting and I think undocumented area of Pokemon Crystal is the Battle Tower. This is such a big topic, I feel like I could make a full video on it, but the Pokemon here are weird. So basically, depending on what level you go in at, you get a different roster of Pokemon. You could do 10, 20, 30, 50, all the way up to 100. Like, if you were to go into the level 10 roster, you'll be fighting Pokemon as good as Aerodactyl, Snorlax, and Blissey. There's also weird inconsistencies, like the legendary birds being in the 50, 60, 70, and 80 roster. Meanwhile, the level 100 roster is surprisingly bad, with no pseudos, legendary birds, and a very manageable lineup. So maybe in another video we'll go more in depth on this, but one really cool fact are actually the members of the Battle Tower, because there are actually members named after Pokemon staff. There's Bugcatcher Tajiri, named after the creator of Pokemon. There's Scientist Mori and Teacher Kawakami. These are both people who are listed under these special thanks in the credits. And there's even guitarist Masuda, legend of the Masuda method and the game's musical director. Now, moving on from here, I've got a few other fun trivia facts for you. Did you know the total number of moves in this game is equal to the total number of Pokemon, both totaling 251? Did you know Crystal is the only internationally released upper version of the game where the gym leaders or champion don't use any different Pokemon compared to their original pair of games? Did you know that Gen 2 female Pokemon are slightly worse? There's an issue with female Pokemon stats where they could not have the highest IV or DV value for the attack stat. And next up, let's talk about Belly Drum. So in Gen 2, Belly Drum raises the user's attack stat by 12 stages. This is so that the Pokemon gets to +6 no matter how many stages it's been lowered. So what's cool though, is if you use Belly Drum under half HP, it will fail, but your attack will still increase by 2 stages. And that's because Belly Drum is not a unique command. When selecting the move Belly Drum, it simply executes the move Swords Dance 6 times. And due to limitations of the game, they had to put one of these commands before the HP check. So the command does one Swords Dance, an HP check, and then states that the move fails. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know the theory that the legendary beasts of Johto are the original 3 evolutions resurrected by Ho-Oh. And while this mostly exists as a theory, I think a lot of people miss a huge piece of evidence to suggest this truth. Sage Gaku, Kogu, and Massey are 3 Sage trainers that block your path to the Tin Tower. They're sort of the protectors of the Tin Tower, and through that, the protectors of Ho-Oh. But after performing all Suicune cutscenes and receiving the clear bell, you're able to access this area. Before you battle Suicune, however, you're forced to battle them back to back in the previous building. All three of them have a Noctowl, but their aces are none other than the three original evolutions: Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon. A lesser-known piece of evidence to cement the Ho-Oh evolution connection. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe because I like seeing the number go up, and I'll see you later.